Every country on Earth is drowning in debt, but here's the question no one asks: if everyone owes money, who is actually owed? Because what you're about to see isn't an accident. It's a system designed to trap you and every nation on this planet forever. Today, every nation you can name, the United States, Japan, Germany, China, they all owe money, not just millions, not even billions, but trillions. The US alone is buried under more than $38 trillion in debt. Japan owes $9 trillion, and the entire planet? A staggering $315 trillion, 3 times more than all the goods and services the world produces in a year. So if every country is in debt, then who stands on the other side of the equation? Who is the creditor of the entire world? The truth is, this system was built centuries ago, not by governments, not by the people, but by a small group who discovered the ultimate secret: if you control money creation, you don't need armies to rule the world. To uncover how we got trapped here, we need to go back to a time before the dollar, before Wall Street, before the modern economy even existed. The year is 1694. England is at war with France. The crown is bankrupt, desperate for funds, and unable to borrow from its own people. And that's when a Scottish merchant named William Paterson walked in with a proposal that would change human history forever. Paterson's idea was simple, but revolutionary. He offered to lend money to the government, not in gold, but in paper promises backed by gold. In exchange, he and his private investors would receive a royal charter to establish the Bank of England, a private institution empowered to issue England's money. The deal was struck, and in that moment, money stopped being something governments created and became something they borrowed. But there was a catch. Every pound issued by the new bank came with interest attached. Yet the interest itself was never created. That meant there would always be more debt in the system than money to pay it off. A design flaw? No, a design feature, because this system only works if the world stays in debt. If nations, corporations, and citizens keep borrowing forever. Paterson later admitted it himself: the bank hath benefit of interest on all monies which it creates out of nothing. From that moment on, money was no longer a measure of value, it was a claim on the future. A future that could never be fully repaid, and the bankers who built this system knew exactly what they were doing. Because once you make money out of debt, you can make the entire world your debtor. The creation of the Bank of England didn't just save a desperate monarchy, it planted the seed of a system that would slowly spread across the globe, replicating itself through war, empire, and the illusion of prosperity. What began as a clever financial invention soon became the foundation of global control. Because when a government borrows from private bankers, it becomes dependent on them. And once you control the debt, you control the debtor. The rise of the invisible rulers through the 1700s, the Bank of England's model inspired imitators across Europe. France, the Netherlands, and the emerging United States all flirted with the same idea, allowing private entities to issue public money. It sounded practical, even progressive. After all, why burden the state with gold when credit could be created on paper? But hidden within this innovation was the quiet rise of a new kind of power, one that operated above kings, nations, and constitutions. These were the money creators, the people who didn't just lend wealth. They manufactured it, the American experiment. When the American colonies broke free from Britain, they wanted to escape this system. The Founding Fathers had seen what debt and central banking had done to Europe. Endless wars, hidden taxation through inflation, and a population forever owing money to private creditors. Benjamin Franklin famously said that one of the major causes of the American Revolution was Britain's refusal to let the colonies issue their own money, the colonial scrip. Instead, the colonies were forced to borrow at interest from the Bank of England. So after independence, the young United States experimented with its own systems, first with state banks, then with Alexander Hamilton's First Bank of the United States, a controversial institution modeled after the Bank of England. Its critics, Thomas Jefferson among them, warned that private banking power would enslave the nation more surely than any foreign army. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, Jefferson wrote, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property. Until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered, that warning would echo through history, because within just 2 decades, it came true. The debt machine expands. The first bank's charter expired in 1811, but the financial elite weren't finished. A second central bank emerged in 1816, once again issuing paper money as debt. When President Andrew Jackson finally shut it down in 1836, he declared victory against the den of vipers and thieves, but victory was temporary. Because the idea had already spread too far. Private bankers had realized something profound: control of money creation was more powerful than control of armies or parliaments. They could fund both sides of wars, profit from both victories and defeats, and shape the fate of nations without ever firing a shot. By the mid-1800s, central banks were quietly forming the nervous system of world finance, coordinating through bonds, credit, and interest. Every time a government went to war, it borrowed. Every time it borrowed, the money creators expanded their control. And every time they expanded, the people's freedom shrank. The Rothschild era. No discussion of this system can ignore the Rothschild dynasty, a family that mastered the art of using debt as power. In the 19th century, they financed kings and empires, revolutions, and railroads. They built a trans-European banking network so vast that even monarchs relied on their approval before launching wars. Nathan Rothschild famously said after financing the British victory at Waterloo, "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the money supply." Whether fully accurate or not, the quote captures the undeniable truth of that era. Political power had become secondary to financial power. And once money creation became centralized, the world itself became collateral. The 20th century, debt goes global. By the early 1900s, the world's major powers had adopted central banking. But the game was about to change forever. In 1913, the United States, after nearly 100 years of resisting, established the Federal Reserve System. It was sold to the public as a way to stabilize the economy and prevent crises. But its real design followed the same blueprint William Patterson created 2 centuries earlier: private interests controlling the issuance of public money for profit. The timing was no coincidence. Within a year, World War I erupted. Nations needed funding. Banks printed the money. And suddenly, the debts of governments turned into assets for financiers. The war ended, but the debt didn't. Instead, it compounded. By the 1920s, the US had become the world's creditor. But even America would soon be caught in its own trap when the speculative bubble of the Roaring Twenties burst into the Great Depression. The breaking point: gold dies as economies collapsed. Governments tried to print their way out, but confidence in paper money began to crumble. People demanded gold, the one thing bankers couldn't print. So in 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt made a shocking move. He confiscated all private gold and made it illegal for citizens to own it. For the first time in history, Americans could no longer convert their money into gold, only government promises. And just like that, the final link between real value and paper currency was severed. Money had officially become debt, and debt had become the lifeblood of the global economy. The illusion of prosperity in the decades that followed. The system became more complex, but the core mechanism stayed the same. Banks issued credit, governments borrowed. People took loans to buy homes, cars, and education. The economy appeared to grow, but it was all fueled by expanding debt. Every dollar circulating in the economy existed because someone, somewhere, owed it to a bank with interest. And the total amount owed would always exceed the amount of money in existence. That's why the debt keeps rising, no matter which party is in power, no matter what reforms are promised. Because the system itself demands perpetual borrowing to survive. If borrowing stops, the system collapses. If borrowing continues, the debt explodes. Either way, you can never escape. By the time the world entered the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, global finance had evolved into a tightly interconnected machine. Currencies were now pegged to the US dollar, and the dollar itself was pegged to gold, creating the illusion of stability. But even that illusion wouldn't last. Because behind closed doors, bankers and politicians were already planning the next transformation, one that would remove the last chain restraining infinite debt creation. And in 1971, it happened. President Richard Nixon ended the gold standard completely. From that moment on, the US dollar, and by extension, every currency on Earth became pure fiat. Money was now backed by nothing but trust. And for the architects of this system, that was the final step toward total control. Because now, they could create money without limit and make the entire world borrow it back forever. When Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, the world crossed a line it could never uncross. For centuries, gold had been a natural limit on money creation, a barrier that forced restraint. But once that anchor was gone, money became infinite. And infinite money meant infinite debt. At first, the world didn't notice. The 1970s brought a temporary boom, new credit, new spending, and new illusions of prosperity. But beneath the surface, the engine of debt began to accelerate faster than ever before. Governments realized they could now finance anything, wars, welfare, even failure, by simply printing more money. Central banks no longer needed gold, they only needed trust. And for a while, people trusted the petrodollar revolution, but there was still a problem. If the dollar was no longer backed by gold, why would the rest of the world continue to use it? The answer came through a deal so clever, most people still don't know it happened. In 1974, U.S. officials struck an agreement with Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer. The deal was simple. Saudi oil would be sold exclusively in U.S. dollars. In return, America would provide military protection and arms. This single arrangement quietly created what became known as the petrodollar system. Now, every country on Earth needed dollars, not for gold, but for oil. That meant global demand for U.S. debt was guaranteed. Every barrel of oil sold kept the dollar alive, and every dollar printed deepened the world's dependence on it. The U.S. could now export inflation to the rest of the world while importing real goods in exchange for paper promises and the countries that needed dollars. They borrowed them, with interest. It was the perfect trap. The credit explosion by the 1980s, the system entered its next phase, financialization. Real productivity was replaced by leverage. Corporations no longer grew by innovation, they grew by borrowing. Wall Street became the new empire. Banks invented derivatives, swaps, and synthetic instruments, complex tools that multiplied debt at lightning speed. Every time someone borrowed, every time someone spent, the system expanded temporarily. But to keep growing, it had to keep creating more debt than before. When debt creation slowed, recessions appeared. When recessions hit, central banks cut interest rates to encourage more borrowing. When rates hit zero, they printed money directly. And so the cycle reinforced itself. Debt created growth, growth justified more debt, and no one dared to stop the machine. The global web titans by the 1990s and early 2000s, the system had gone fully global. International institutions like the IMF and World Bank became the lenders of last resort, extending billions to developing nations under the banner of aid. But this aid came with strings. Countries had to adopt structural adjustments, policies that opened their economies to foreign capital, privatized public assets, and cut social programs. It was the 18th century all over again, the same pattern, now scaled to the entire world. The rich lent, the poor borrowed, and in return for credit, they surrendered sovereignty. By 2008, the illusion finally cracked. The 2008 crisis, the mask comes off. It began, fittingly, with debt. Years of reckless lending had inflated a housing bubble so massive that when it popped, it threatened to bring down the entire global financial system. Banks had lent money they didn't have, on assets that didn't exist, to people who couldn't pay it back. And yet, when the system collapsed, the debtors lost everything, while the lenders were bailed out. Trillions of dollars were created out of thin air to rescue the system that caused the collapse in the first place. This was the moment the public began to see the truth. Debt wasn't a flaw. Debt was the product. The crisis didn't end. It was simply transferred from private banks to public balance sheets. Governments borrowed to save the banks, and citizens were left with the bill. The new phase, quantitative easing to stimulate recovery. Central banks began a new experiment, quantitative easing. Instead of waiting for banks to lend, they created trillions of dollars directly and pumped it into the financial markets. Stock prices soared, real estate boomed again. And once more, the illusion of prosperity returned, but underneath, inequality exploded. Because while the newly printed money went to those who owned assets, the wealthy, the average worker's wages stagnated. Money creation had become a one-way transfer of wealth from the future, to the present. From the many to the few, the trap tightens. By the 2010s, the global debt had crossed $100 trillion. By the 2020s, it hit $315 trillion. And here's the terrifying part, the system now requires more new debt each year just to keep from collapsing. If global debt creation slows, even slightly, the entire structure starts to shake. Markets panic, governments intervene, central banks print more. It is a perpetual motion machine powered by promises, but it's running out of time. Because every new dollar of debt now creates less growth than the last. Every bailout needs to be bigger than the one before. And every fix only delays the reckoning. The hidden victims, while the top 1% accumulate record wealth, ordinary people face the consequences. Rising inflation that silently erodes their savings, housing prices that outpace incomes, student and medical debts that can never be paid off, and a generation born into a system where every opportunity comes with a price tag, interest attached. This is the genius of the design. You never see the chains. You just feel them in your bills, your taxes, your rent, your loans. You're not a free participant in the economy, you're collateral. The new illusion, digital money, and now, as the old system begins to crumble under its own weight, a new one is emerging, the digital control system. Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, are being tested worldwide. They're sold as innovation, as convenience, but behind the marketing lies the same architecture of control, only far more powerful. Because in a digital money system, every transaction is traceable. Every account can be frozen, every rule can be enforced in real time. If you think debt is a cage, wait until money itself becomes programmable. That's the endgame on not just financial dependency, but behavioral control. The system that began in 1694 as a clever financial invention has now evolved into a digital prison. And most people don't even realize they're inside. But if this is a trap, who built it? And what happens when the debt that fuels it finally exceeds the system's ability to sustain itself? The answer lies in the final stage of this story, the collapse no one can prevent, and the rebirth that might follow. The point of no return by 2025, the global financial system has reached a mathematical limit. For every dollar of real growth, over $5 of new debt are created. Governments print, banks lend, and investors speculate, but none of it produces true wealth. Instead, we built an economy on the illusion of prosperity, powered by borrowed time and borrowed money. The debt is no longer a number, it's a structure. It's the invisible scaffolding that holds up everything: pensions, housing markets, jobs, even governments themselves. And if that structure collapses, the world as we know it goes with it. But this is the part no one wants to say out loud. It's not supposed to be fixed, it's supposed to keep you inside. Because the system isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed. The final evolution of control, as inflation surges and currencies weaken, people naturally begin to lose trust in their money. They search for alternatives: gold, crypto, tangible assets, anything that feels real. And that's exactly when the next solution arrives, perfectly timed. The central bank digital currency, the digital dollar, euro, or yuan. The pitch sounds innocent: faster transactions, safer money, less fraud. But under the surface, it's the final link in the chain. A CBDC isn't just a digital version of cash, it's programmable. It can track where, when, and how you spend. It can expire. It can be frozen. It can even enforce spending limits or social compliance. This is the next stage of the same system William Patterson conceived centuries ago: money created from nothing, now combined with total surveillance. Imagine a world where every transaction you make can be approved or denied by an algorithm. Where your financial score determines what you can buy or even where you can travel. That isn't freedom. That's economic captivity disguised as convenience. The illusion of escapism believe cryptocurrency might be the key to breaking free, and in some ways, it is a form of rebellion. Bitcoin, for example, was designed to be a currency outside of central control, limited in supply, decentralized in power. It represents the opposite philosophy of fiat money, scarcity instead of infinite creation, but even here, the system adapts. Governments now regulate exchanges, tax transactions, and develop their own blockchain networks, turning the very tools of freedom into mechanisms of control. Because when power feels threatened, it doesn't fight the revolution, it absorbs it. The truth is, the architects of this system don't need to control every currency. They only need to control the on-ramps and off-ramps, the points where your money enters and exits the grid. As long as you rely on their rails, you're still playing their game. The hidden cost of freedom debt has always been presented as opportunity. A home loan, a student loan, a business loan, all symbols of progress. But behind each one is a quiet truth. The moment you sign, you surrender a piece of your future. The system thrives on that surrender. Because when you owe, you comply. When you're dependent, you obey. And when every nation, corporation, and citizen is indebted, true independence becomes impossible. That's why every fix we see, bailouts, stimulus packages, quantitative easing, isn't a rescue. It's an extension of captivity. They're not rebuilding the system, they're reinforcing the cage. The debt illusion and the real wealth isn't measured in dollars or digits, it's measured in control, in ownership, in freedom of time and choice. But the system trains you to chase income, not freedom. To measure your success in currency, the very thing that keeps you enslaved. Think about it. Every paycheck, every investment, every saving account exists within the same cycle: inflation, taxation, and debt expansion. It's not designed to make you wealthy, it's designed to keep you participating. Because as long as you keep running in the hamster wheel of credit and consumption, the system stays alive. Stop running, and it collapses. The pattern repeats. History shows that every empire built on debt eventually faces the same fate. Rome debased its currency with cheaper metals until faith collapsed. Spain drowned in silver inflation after draining the mines of the New World. Britain's empire fell under the weight of its own financial commitments. And now, the United States, at the heart of the modern debt system, stands at the same crossroads. The signs are identical: excessive money printing, rising inequality, political division, loss of global confidence. Every empire believes it's different until it isn't, and when trust in the currency breaks, so does the illusion of control. The coming reset eventually, a point arrives where the system can't expand anymore. Debt becomes too large, interest payments consume too much, and the illusion of endless growth cracks. When that happens, there are only two options. 1. Default, where debts are erased through collapse, chaos, or war. 2. Reset, where debts are restructured, currencies are revalued, and a new system is introduced. Both paths lead to the same place: a global transition. And history suggests it's already in motion. The push for digital currencies, global tax coordination, and international debt relief programs, these are not random policies. They are preparation for the next version of the same system. Because those who designed the old one are already building the new one. 3 takeaways. First, the financial system we live under isn't natural, it's engineered. From the Bank of England to the Federal Reserve, every stage has been crafted to keep money scarce, debt abundant, and power concentrated. Second, the debt isn't just national, it's personal. Every time you borrow, spend, or even save within this framework, you reinforce it. Awareness is the first step toward autonomy. Third, true wealth doesn't come from beating the system, it comes from stepping outside it. Owning real assets, building skills, creating value. These are the only forms of wealth that can't be printed away. The final warning: this is the part they never want you to see. The system only has power as long as you believe in it. The moment enough people question it, its illusion begins to fade. But until that happens, every paycheck, every loan, every dollar is a link in the chain. They designed a system you can never escape. But you can see it, you can understand it. And once you do, you can begin to build a life beyond it. Because the most dangerous person in a world built on debt is the one who no longer needs to borrow. If this opened your eyes, share it. Because the first step toward freedom is awareness.